Good morning, Dan and Amy. So Bernie Sanders has been quite pronounced during some of the confirmation hearings. We found out yesterday during his exchange with Dr. Tom Price that America is not a compassionate nation, not compared to, say, I don't know, Canada or Luxembourg. And the day before, we found out in the hearing for Betsy DeVos, Trump's nominee for Education Secretary, that she's too rich to be Education Secretary.
My question is, and I don't mean to be rude.
No, of course not.
But do you think if you were not a multi-billionaire, if your family has not made hundreds of millions of dollars of contributions to the Republican Party, that you would be sitting here today?
Senator, as a matter of fact, I do think that I've worked very hard on behalf of parents and children for the last almost 30 years to be a voice for parents and to voice for students and to empower parents to make decisions on behalf of their children, primarily low-income children.
Thank you.
Now, she displayed such poise and grace when answering that question. Because I'm sick of the Republicans who are successful being vilified. Yes, there's some family money involved, but she does care about children. And I'm sorry she doesn't have an education degree, as my lefty friends always say, but she is knowledgeable enough to try and further school choice. Or at least or charter schools are trying to have that be an option on the table.
So you think that working in a particular field of endeavor for 30 years means something? It doesn't mean something if you have a particular net worth. Above a certain threshold of income, the rest of what you do with your life doesn't matter. That's the Bernie Sanders opinion, clearly. Here's the question I would have had for Sanders back, but I know you have to exercise restraint in these hearings. That's why I'll never be a cabinet secretary. Mr. Sanders, Senator Sanders, excuse me, because I know you've earned it, Barbara Boxer. Senator Sanders, do you think you'd be here if you didn't come from a daffy state that thinks we can run the economy on Vermont maple syrup? Do you think you'd be in the Senate? For more on the DeVos hearing and what that would portend for K-12 education in the country, we're pleased to be joined by Robert Enlow. He is the president and CEO of the Milton and Rose Friedman Foundation for School Choice. Robert, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. Robert, do we have?
Can you hear me?
Oh, yep, there we go. Okay.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us. And your reaction to Betsy DeVos's treatment before the Senate's Star Chamber the other day.
So these hearings can be tough. I thought she handled herself, like Amy said, with incredible poise and grace. I have great faith in Betsy and know she'll do a good job. She's a strong leader in our movement. And I know I can't wait to see what she's going to get done. You know, these things can be pressure cookers, but I thought she did well. And by the Sanders definition, according to Open Secrets, more than half the Senate are now millionaires, right? So I guess according to Sanders' definition, there shouldn't be any Senate either.
Well, and I know that Penny Pritzker would have been disqualified to be Obama's Commerce Secretary, but my sense is there are different standards depending on your philosophical worldview. Can you give us a little bit of background, because the cheap criticisms of Betsy DeVos from people who don't know of her work, don't share her view on education reform. Give us some perspective on the last 30 years that she referenced but wasn't allowed to explain at that hearing.
You know, so at Ed Choice, it's been an honor to work alongside Betsy for the last, I've been back here since 22 years, 1996. She has been tirelessly working to improve the lot of education for low-income families in particular, and middle-income families as well, to get them a chance to have better schooling options, to hold those schools accountable, and to try and make sure that families are able to choose what's right for their children. She's been doing that not only in her personal time, but using her personal treasure. So time, talent, and treasure, she's been using all of those the last 20 years that I've known her to make sure that families who have less have the opportunity to have more. But I think there's very few people who have spent the kind of time, and I certainly know talent and treasure that she has, to try and improve the lot of families who need the most help.
Well, a concern from the left is that she wants to try and break up the teachers' union and that she wants everything to be a charter school. Is there any truth to that?
So I think we want every school to be a good school, regardless whether it's public, private, or charter, and I think that's the way she feels. I think she, like all of us, would say, we don't want anything to get in the way of whether that school could be a good school or a bad, right? a good school. If it's a bad school, then there's some things that are causing it to be a bad school, and we need to get those obstacles out of the way. So I think she would say, we don't care about the school type. We want all schools to be good for kids, and if something's getting in the way of that, we need to get rid of it.
With respect to charter schools and school choice programs, this is not a laboratory experiment. We're less familiar with it here in Chicago because of the blockades that have been erected towards really expanding choice beyond a handful of charter schools relative to the overall number of schools. I wonder, from your broader perspective, as somebody who's been in this movement, this reform effort for so many years, as you just described, what is the real experience and what are the real results in places like Milwaukee and Cleveland and Florida that have embarked upon, in Indiana, of course, that have been embarked on more aggressive kind of competition breeds competence choice programs in education?
So the real results in all those states that live outside the bubble, outside of D.C., have been really positive for families, not only in the charter sector primarily, but also in the school choice sector. Based on the data we know about the private school choice movement, 25 out of 28 studies show that children improve academically if they get a scholarship. We know almost all of the studies show that public schools respond positively. And all of the studies show that schools don't lose a dime. So we've got a situation here where we know something works in over 60, so there are now 60 programs working in 31 states, right? In D.C., there is actually a program in D.C. where kids are graduating at higher rates than their peers who are using scholarships, right under the noses of the Senate, right? You see this program, and Betsy DeVos has been a huge part of that program. So we know it's working, and we know even in the criticism they make of Detroit, actually, that's not really true at all. We're watching the Detroit charter schools outperform the public schools. And sure, could they be better? Well, every school can be better. But the kids that are in the charter schools are doing markedly better than the kids that are in the traditional schools. And really what matters is that all schools improve.
So when it comes to power and control, she doesn't want the federal government to be in control. She wants to give that to the states and local authorities and school councils?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question, right? So the federal government spends about, of our total amount of money on K-12 education in America, about 11% of the money comes from the federal government, right? There are certain policies like the IDEA legislation that states are required to follow, and that's important. We want kids to have a fair and appropriate education. But states are required to implement those programs. And not all states do so well. But you do want to make sure that the states have the ability to implement these federal laws with fidelity and allow some flexibility. In many states, for example, children get to go to private schools if the public schools doesn't serve them for their free and appropriate education. The key thing here is to remember that the schools are at the local level, and we need to give them the most flexibility and control that we can, recognizing that there are some certain elements about special needs and civil rights that we need to be cognizant of. And I think that's what she was saying if she would have been given enough time.
Trump, in the debates and on the stump, talked about school choice. He mentioned it specifically with respect to minority families in urban centers, that I'm going to get you access to better schools. You should be able to send your kids to good schools the same way Barack Obama or Rahm Emanuel or any other politician is able to send their kids to the schools of their choice. That combination with Mike Pence hailing from Indiana, that has the most expansive school choice program in the country, getting to middle-income households there, combined with Betsy DeVos, do you see the prospect for a real watershed moment in the school choice movement with this administration?
So I think this administration has signaled, rightly so, and certainly in education, that it's no longer business as usual. So I'm excited about a lot of things they can do. They certainly can deal with the regulatory burden on schools and try and ease that, make it easier for teachers to teach, and make it easier for parents to choose. So I think those are all very good things, and I'm excited about that. I think on the federal level, we've got to make sure that whatever policy they come out with for school choice doesn't create unnecessary burdens on schools that want to participate. You got a lot of schools out there who are private schools that want to participate, but don't want to participate if it requires them to fill out 50 pages of paperwork, or if it requires them to take time. So one of my friends in Arizona who used to be superintendent, she used to say, I get 9%, this is back in the day, I get 9% of my money from the feds, and 50% of my staff time is compliance for feds.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to have that problem. So I think the challenge of going forward at the federal level with advancing school choice will be to do it in a way that doesn't burden the schools that want to participate. But on the whole, this is not going to be business as usual anymore. It's going to be a different type of Department of Education, and that's exciting to see.
I wanted to get your take on Common Core. I know it's up to the states, and it seems to be on the decline. Was it effective at all?
I think Common Core basically was not effective, and in particular, it was going to die of its own weight anyway, right? So this is exactly what I've been talking about, having local control and local flexibility. What works in a place like, as you heard, Alaska, doesn't necessarily work in a place like Detroit. You need to have some flexibility. Now, that said, children we do need to understand where they are on tests, right? We do, whether those tests are standardized tests put by the state or whether they're the ACT or the SAT. It's an important measurement, but remember, that's just a measurement to help understand where kids are. It's not something that is the end-all, be-all. When we talk about quality schools nowadays, almost all the time, all we're talking about is a test score, because we have no other indication about how schools are doing besides, hey, here's a test score, you're either doing well or you're not. And then we bash schools, regardless of whether they're public, private, or charter, and say, well, look, you're no good because you didn't do well on this test. That's really not the way we should be looking at education, and Common Core was just going to exacerbate that problem. It was going to make it all about a simple test score and how you're doing on that test score. And I think that would have been a real problem for this country, and really not about what a child needs to have a whole, well-rounded education.
Milton Friedman was the intellectual founder of the modern school choice movement. Robert Enlow is the president and CEO of the Friedman Foundation for School Choice. Robert, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.